Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio. We are so glad to be here today. We've got a fantastic guest joining us in just a few moments. I got to tell you, this week has gone by quickly and slowly. I feel that we probably did 2 weeks worth of work and play at the G.I.C. this week. What a fantastic week it's been. Let's welcome Trevor Knott, who is joining us from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and he'll be taking your questions live on the chat. Hello, Trevor.
Hello. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm just sitting here thinking that last week we were talking about how you were coming down to the States, and now you're already back in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
What a fun-filled week, I've got to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
It was great having you down here, and thank you, by the way, for that fantastic birthday present of going to the Avett Brothers show here in Roanoke. So thanks a lot, and it's so weird that, like I said, we've seemed to have done so much this week, and it's only been 7 days, but it's been great. And how is everything going now that you're home, and what's going on in Canada this week?
Everything's kind of back to normal. You know, Canada is going through some flooding right now.
Yeah, I saw that. Calgary, and our prayers definitely go out to them. As a matter of fact, I went to an event this Sunday where someone was from Calgary, and has actually has been maintaining contact with everybody there because of everything that's happening. I think it was, up to 10 meters or something outrageous like that in some places where the water was reaching the second floor. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty amazing. Anyway, like I said, we've had a really, really busy week. I know many of us are following, there's just so much stuff going on in the news. I don't even know where to start this week as far as headlines, but let's just say there's a lot to be aware of. I know many people are watching the Supreme Court and what's going to be happening with the reverse of DOMA. I have a feeling it will be a reverse, and I also feel it's probably going to be used as a campaign thing for the Obama administration and the Democratic Party, and they're going to take all the credit because it happened on Pride Week. But again, those of us who aren't manipulated by media can hopefully see that this is a right that everyone deserves. It doesn't matter who, when, and where, and how it came about. However, as well, we're seeing a lot with the Snowden situation, and I just saw the United States has threatened Russia. Boy, what a very, very interesting energy this week. I know we just had the solstice was, I believe it was last Friday. Trevor and I were lucky enough to celebrate that together, as well as this amazing moon on Sunday, and I was very lucky to be able to celebrate that. I got to tell you, for me personally, the energy has been very, what shall we say? I know we talk a lot about speeding things up, but I will say that my dream time has been very active with a lot of lessons, and it was very funny because the night before last, I had this very in-my-face lesson shown to me on a screen during my dream time, and it was about putting out a fire. And they were telling me I have to put the fire out alone. And I woke up, and Trevor, you don't even know this, but we had some issues with Ning, where the Ning server was taken down, and I had to figure out what was going on and get us back up. I didn't even have a chance to talk about it, but our website was down for like 20 minutes yesterday, and nobody knew, including myself. I was able to figure out what was happening and kind of just handle it on my own. So I hope that's what they were talking about. But again, there's been a lot of stuff going on in the news, and this has a lot to do. And I talk about this very often here on the show and on our YouTube videos about how we're going through a kind of like a birthing process here on our planet. And those of us who are, as some people call it, on the front lines, we're kind of the midwives of trying to get us through this leap of evolution, whether you want to call it political evolution, spiritual evolution, or physical evolution. There is a humongous awakening happening around the world, and it's coming in many different forms. Our guest today, Anodea Judith, is a world-renowned teacher and best-selling author who has been called a prophet for our time. With a Masters and Doctorate in Psychology and Healing, she has been a lifelong student of history, mythology, comparative religion, yoga, sociology, politics. She's best known for her groundbreaking works bridging Eastern disciplines with Western psychology through her classic books Wheels of Life and Eastern Body, Western Mind. She has created an award-winning DVD, The Illuminated Chakras, and an empowering manual for manifestation, creating on purpose. We are here today to talk to her about her newest book on this wonderful social evolution that is happening, The Global Heart Awakens, Humanity's Rite of Passage from the Love of Power to the Power of Love. So let's welcome our special guest and new friend, Anodea Judith. Hello, welcome. How are you today?
Oh, I'm great, Bernard. Delighted to be on the show. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I guess, to some people.
And we're so glad to have you. I've got to tell you, I'm a huge fan of the Illuminated Chakras. I thought it was absolutely fantastic.
And you might not know that it was my son who created all the graphics. Alex Wayne is my son. We worked on it for 2 years. We started it when he was 19 years old, and we finished it when he was 21.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, congratulations to both of you. I got to tell you, it's a wonderful video. If no one has seen it, go ahead and get the DVD or rent it or whatever, because it is absolutely worth. It's only about 40 minutes long, I believe.
27.
27. Okay, and it's worth every minute. That's for sure. So. Anodea, let me ask you, as we ask every one of our guests when it's your first time here on the show, we always want to hear a little bit about what brought you to what you're doing today. Can you give us a little bit of this? What's the background story of bringing you to the work that you do today?
Well, it's really a combination of many things. I have a proclivity for seeing patterns and loving systems that embrace those patterns. So I fell in love with the chakra system 40 years ago and just saw it as a very powerful key to transformation. In fact, I even had a dream at the time that I was walking in the wood. I was walking on a mountaintop and I picked up a rock, and underneath the rock was this key. And as I picked up the key, the whole earth shook. And I went, oh, I found the key to something very powerful. And I think the chakra system is that key. And so as I worked with it for so many years with individual transformation, seeing it as a model for how it maps onto our own body and takes us to different planes of reality, I saw also that it mapped onto human history. And as I looked at that over really 2 decades and researched it, I saw that we were moving from the third chakra, which is oriented to power and ego and individuality, to the fourth chakra, which is more oriented to community and collaboration and connection and like internet collaboration, networking, and that we are really changing our organizing system at this time. And that's part of the great shift we're in.
I see, and I've got to tell you, I really enjoy how you, as I've looked through your book and I've read some of it, I really love how you align the evolution of humanity with the chakra system.
Yeah, it's very clearly in there, and that we have evolved through these huge stages. I mean, they last a long time. We've been in the third chakra stage for about 5,000 years. So this shift to a new organizing principle is profound, and it hits every level of civilization.
Absolutely. Now, you talk about how humanity is going through a rite of passage from cultural adolescence into our planetary adulthood. What do you mean by that?
Well, this has nothing to do with chronological age, but that the cultural values and the mindset of the culture right now are very adolescent. First of all, adolescence is a time of a huge growth spurt. And so you look at the, birth of population is doubled in my lifetime, world population. And you see that we are in this growth spurt that can't continue. So an adolescent might grow a foot in a couple of years, an adolescent boy, and then stops growing. So we have to stop our proliferation of population. And we also are very narcissistic. We're not thinking about the future. We use things use the last of it without thinking about where it's coming from. These are all very adolescent kind of characteristics. But we are on the verge of becoming adults where we go to a less narcissistic viewpoint and say, oh, we're all in this together. Adults learn to actually provide for themselves and others. And so this is a new organizing principle as we come to our young adulthood.
That makes complete sense, and it's something that's very obvious if you just look around. Now, a lot of maybe some of our listeners and some of our fans and friends throughout the internet have questioned the idea that humanity is going through an awakening process, that there is a global heart that is awakening. And for me, I notice it either through the spontaneous spiritual epiphanies that people are having, or we're looking at we see things as far in the news as far as like countries speaking their voice, standing up for themselves, and trying to work on a kind of working in a unification process within each national community. What do you see as evidence for this global awakening happening?
Well, it's twofold. One is that, as you say, people are awakening. They're doing spirituality has broken out of the box and become a more individual thing where we can get on our yoga mat or meditate on our cushion, have more direct access. That's evolving people, maturing people. People are finding a hyper connection through the internet, and that we are becoming a more connected society. We're becoming smarter, better informed, more empowered. We can go where we want, say what we want, do what we want in most of the free world. So there is this maturing that's happening that's bringing us to a more heart-based. And at the same time, the old paradigms of power are declining. They're not working anymore. The dictatorships are becoming supplanted, and sure, it's a huge and bloody fight as we see in Syria and, various Arab countries, but there is an old order that is getting overthrown by a new organizing principle. The power blocks of money and the power blocks of politics. I'm just reading this book now, The End of Power, which is saying how power might be easier to get, but it's harder to hold on to because there's more people supplanting it. More power in the hands of individuals than we have ever had at any time in history.
Yeah.
And gives us the power to wake up and make change.
Absolutely. And you said an organizing principle. What is an organizing principle?
Yeah, I spent about 6 months of my life with that question. I like to play with questions in my meditations and my inquiry. And sometimes I'll take a big question and just sit with it for a long time. And so what is the next organizing principle for humanity? It was a question that I sat with for a long time. And an organizing principle is like an operating system. It's a set of, some people call it a meme, which is an ideal that people believe together. Mm-hmm. And an organizing principle of power is a top-down hierarchical structure that began 5,000 years ago when, humanity couldn't read or write. We knew very little about the world. We had no technology. And we were living in cities of 50 or 100,000 people in small areas. So what did it take to coordinate those people. It took somebody very strong who had a lot of power to tell other people what to do, and thus began that, chain of command that was the organizing principle for society at that time. Sort of like a parent with young children. That parent has to have a fairly firm rule because the children don't know much about life. But, we've been growing up since then. We've been getting smarter. We've been getting more empowered. We have technology. We have cars. We have airplanes, trains, radio, internet. We have all these tools that empower individuals. And that old organizing principle of a top-down parental authority, it doesn't work anymore, any more than it works for an adolescent who's starting to rebel against his parents and saying, wait a minute, you can't tell me what to do. I'm making my own worldview. And so we're at that same place in society.
Yes, I can see that, and I'm sure many of us are seeing that. Many people are referred to. I love that you call it the old world order, because many people try to call it the new world order, and I feel that it is collapsing, and you can't help but notice the desperation in the governing, for lack of a better term, the 1%.
Yep.
And how they're so desperate to hold on to what little power is left, when you're seeing country after country after country turning their back on that power base. And you are seeing, new values coming up. We're seeing a lot of change happening. And one of the questions that many people ask, including myself, what are our values going to be, and do we have any idea of what we're changing into?
Well, let's look at it this way. 3 billion years ago, single-celled organisms had been living on the planet. The earliest life is about 3.8 billion years ago. And so actually, no, 1 billion years ago. It was for 3 billion years, single-celled organisms were just individuals replicating and spreading across the planet. And then about 1 billion years ago, they figured out how to put themselves together. They figured out how to combine forces, and we had the first multi-celled creatures. And in like 0.03% of that time, we had a proliferation of species that just 1 billion years later led to humans and, computers and airplanes and all the things we have today. So we are at the same point on this planet where everything has been very individual. How do I get mine? How do I make my mark? How do I make more money? How do I get a bigger house? How do I, get my own self out there? That's been the model that most of us have grown up in. But as we look at how do we create together, how do we co-create reality that I really call heaven on earth, we are at the forefront of being able to do that through network collaboration, through scientific collaboration, through community. And that can create things we don't even dream of right now.
It certainly does. And for those of us who are seeing this collaboration taking place, it really is, for me, it's very awe-inspiring. Coming from, someone who grew up in a big city, myself growing up in Miami Beach, really seeing that whole me mentality. And then now, here we are in the 21st century living in what I call the country, even though it is a city, but compared to the big city, it's quite small. And just seeing so many people collaborating on different community projects and not expecting anything in return. And I think that's where a lot of the value system is starting to change. We're doing it for the whole without expectation. And I wonder what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I like to quote Paul Hawken here, who talks of, he really charted this movement. His book, A Blessed Unrest, charted the movement of people into non-governmental organizations. And he said it's the biggest movement in the history of humanity and the biggest movement on the planet today of individuals voluntarily giving their time and energy and money to organizations designed to keep the peace, environmental sustainability, social justice, study of consciousness, preservation of democracy, all these kind of ideals. And no one is commanding this movement. No one is telling them to do that. And these are things that the people are addressing that our power structures of government are not particularly taking good care of. The government's not taking good care of the environment. It's not taking good care of the economy. It's not taking good care of, all of these issues. Democracy is becoming undermined. And so it's falling to the people to do that. But what is so exciting is that people really are, from the love of their hearts, volunteering to serve and to save what they love. And this has never before happened on such a scale.
I agree, and as someone who considers their work to be in service for others without asking in return, I can relate to that, as well as the fact that we are just seeing so many, like you said, communities with it, and it's not necessarily, like you said, there's not necessarily someone telling people to do that. It is something that happens internally. It's almost like I said, like a calling, perhaps.
And it also happens with enough maturity in society that, you couldn't do what you were doing if you were living in sheer survival. You have to have that down to a certain degree to have a little leftover energy to contribute and to give back. But at this point in time, those of us who are alive, we've been provided with the roads and the railroads and the airports and the infrastructure that we can just go down to the grocery store and buy almost anything we want from anywhere in the world. We've been given all these things that our ancestors actually had to create. And so what have we been given them for? We don't have to do that part. Now we can rise to the next level and co-create with this infrastructure in place. And I think the vision is to co-create heaven on earth.
Oh, I agree. Absolutely. It's inevitable. It's funny. I have a quote going around the internet right now that it is my belief that when we are truly in line with our spiritual nature, that social responsibility is inevitable. And
Yes.
This is exactly what you're talking about. Now, in your book, The Global Heart Awakens, there's a beautiful weaving of three essential questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? So hopefully before this first break, let's start with who are we?
Well, who are we is one of the most incredible species to have ever stepped onto this planet. We are the latest model in evolution. We're actually the newest ones to the party. And we are a species capable of incredible creativity. We are also a species capable of destroying the life support of our planet. So we're the first species that can destroy things. We're the first species to realize we can do that. We're the first species to actually be able to do something about it, to realize, hey, we're creating global warming. Hey, we're destroying the biosphere. We can stop and we can do something. We have the capacity to, change what we're doing. We're the first species with that. And the first species to even understand that we are living in a vast universe of billions of galaxies that we've barely explored. Ants probably don't know that these little pinpoints of light up there, if they can even see them, represent galaxies. We're the only ones that know that. But as a species, as I mentioned before, we're only in our adolescence. So we have not yet matured into our adulthood, which means since, our birth in the primal womb of nature, we have been basically kids with a parental authority, slowly growing up, learning to read, learning about the world, learning how to operate, learning how to get along with each other. As a culture, we've been learning all those things, and now we are on the verge of our adulthood. But how that comes about is through a rite of passage, through an initiatory challenge or ordeal that actually helps us grow up. And that initiatory challenge is brought on by the situation on the planet. It's brought on by global warming, by environmental, resource scarcity, economic change, political instability. All of these issues are confronting us with problems that are actually forcing a new organizing principle. We cannot solve global warming except through global cooperation. So it's the perfect problem to make us evolve into a cooperative society.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all part of our initiation into adulthood. That's who we are. We are an amazing species on the verge of evolving from our adolescence to adulthood. And let me say a little bit more of what that is. I have a saying in the book that evolution is the God's way of making more gods. And so our evolution into adulthood is an evolution into having the power of gods to create and destroy. So we can destroy the planet with nuclear weapons. We can change the gene pool through, genetic modification. We can change the climate through global warming, and we are doing that. And can we change things with wisdom? Can we change things if we have this power on the planetary scale, the scale of gods, to create or destroy? Do we do a potential annihilation or an epic creation? The choice is ours. Mm-hmm. And anybody would say, well, let's choose epic creation. But if you look at the news, it doesn't look like that's what we're choosing. So that's when we have to say, well, how did we get to a place where we're on the verge of becoming gods on this planet and we're destroying the possibility of doing so? That's where we go into who are we? How did we get here?
Yeah, and I can't help. Thousands of questions are popping into my head right now, and we've got a couple more minutes in this segment, so maybe I can throw one or two out there. Is the fact that, okay, so this is what our potential is. This is what is really happening to us. However, we've allowed, we see things like the genetic modification of seeds and the destruction of the planet, and we're seeing wars and we're seeing famines. And this is all, in my personal opinion, this is the governing elites world, not mine. And they're the ones that created this. And if they are the ones who created this, who are we in the sense of what can we do to not allow this to progress much further?
Right. Who are we is, my term now is love-powered evolutionaries. We're evolutionary activists that are starting to see and believe and create in a new world. The structures that created these are the old power structures. And rather than even blame individuals, the structure itself, the structure of hierarchical power, command and control, as we say, absolute power corrupts. Mm-hmm. That in itself leads to this kind of corruption. It leads to war. It leads to famine. It leads to domination. And, rather than say it's a particular ruler that got in power, and sure, we have benevolent rulers and we have dictatorships, we look at the structure itself. We look at the system and say, well, that organizing principle is bound to create this. Mm-hmm. The economic system we have is bound to create inequalities between the rich and poor. And so it's not just that the rich are greedy. I mean, frankly, everybody's greedy. It's the economic system allows the greedy to exploit the others. So if we look at a different organizing principle, we have a different way of co-creating what we have on this earth.
I see. Well, thank you for that. We're going to have to be taking a short break in just a moment, and we'll be right back to continue this discussion.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
And welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio. We are speaking with Anodea Judith about the Global Heart Awakens, her new book. We're going to be continuing our discussion where we left off. Anodea, we were just talking about who are we, and we were talking just a bit about the obstacles that we're dealing with right now in this hierarchical system. For someone, and before we move into the next question, for someone who is concerned that humanity is not going to make it through this, what's your answer to them or your suggestions to them?
Well, that's the person for whom I wrote this book.
Great.
Because anybody who really reads the news and is up on, environmental statistics and where we're going is bound to be discouraged, if not, downright frightened. And what I see is not mincing words about that, but that is part of our rite of passage. The rite of passage almost has to be difficult in order to really awaken new powers, new understandings, new levels of cooperation. If it's not difficult enough, we won't really change. And so what we're seeing as, a potential end of the world and end of life as we know it is really, it is the initiatory ordeal. And so my view in the long run is very positive. Evolution tends to move in the direction of getting better and better. and that we really are on this, like I say, the verge of our adulthood. But it's just a rite of passage.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with you 100%. And if for those of us who are concerned, so many times being involved in doing the work that I'm doing, I hear that the complacency and the apathy of, especially in the United States, is not going to really shift until something major shakes the foundation of our understanding of reality. And that may just be a part of it, but I agree with you that it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of humanity. It's not the end of society. It is something that we must go through in order to be, to kind of align with what's coming, the good that's coming.
Exactly. And so the more we can face into this initiation and say, what does that require of us, the sooner we get through it. And the fact is that for every economic downturn where the price of gas have gone up, the statistics show that people are carpooling more, they're driving less, there's less pollution going into the air. For every downturn, there's less building, raping the forests. So these things are like contractions in a birth process, and as a woman who has given birth, I know that contractions are incredibly painful, but what they're doing is they're closing one door and they're opening another. And so if we are simultaneously opening to a new organizing principle, then those contractions are just helping us get there. We have to literally breathe through it. To breathe together is a conspiracy.
Yes.
And so breathing, the element air is the element associated with the heart chakra. So, as we breathe together, as we open to something larger, as we open to the divine, as we open to vision, as we open to global communication, we're opening the upper chakras, we're opening to a larger space that can actually organize people more efficiently. Every time we have something that's more efficient, it creates a new level of abundance. Like computers created a new abundance because they could do things more efficiently.
Especially with information and cooperation.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have information at our fingertips like we have never, ever had before.
Yeah, and it's absolutely amazing. Now, in this evolutionary process, and I have to say, it's very important for us to understand who we are and where we came from. It seems that many of us in the, whether you want to call it the spiritual activist movement, the truth movement, the light worker movement, the consciousness movement, we all have different ideas of our history. And for me, I'm pretty aware of, let's say, how the hierarchical system came into play. I understand that we were probably living better, 50,000 years ago than we are today. So can you share with us, what are your ideas on where do we come from? You cover a broad expanse of human history, and why is it necessary for us to understand our history?
Well, I come from the perspective of a psychotherapist, and I had a practice for 20 years before I had been on the road so much. And I know that when a client would come to me in crisis, we'd have to do something about the crisis, but that crisis was created out of, beliefs and events and things that happened throughout that person's life. So I'd have to dig into their past to find out, how did they become an alcoholic? How did they become suicidal? How did they destroy their credit? How did they, destroy their marriage, ruin their family, whatever? What was the mitigating thing? So in the same way, as we come towards a crisis point in our culture, we have to ask, how did we get to this point where, as I say, we're on the verge of our adulthood and we're destroying ourselves? What a ridiculous thing to do. How do we get to this point where the masculine is totally in control and, the feminine isn't? That we have a plethora of temples and churches and mosques all to a masculine god, and in the West, not a single goddess temple. How do we get to this point where we just accept that as normal? We just accept that some people have all the money and other people are starving. We've got to ask these questions in order to unravel them. And so I looked back in the past and I looked at putting the culture on the couch. And let's just say if the culture was symbolized as a single person, who would it be? Well, it would be an adolescent, it would be probably a white male, because these are the values that are driving Western culture. And I'm really talking about the West here.
Yeah.
So this adolescent white male comes into my office and says, I'm destroying my home environment. I'm deeply in debt. I'm using all kinds of drugs. I'm having lots of meaningless sex. I don't get along with people. I'm getting into fights all the time. Help. And that's the position we're at. So I'd say, well, who is your mother? And he'd say, I don't even have a mother. I never knew there was one. And I'd go, aha, and who is your father? And he would say, oh, my father's very distant. He just left us a book, but he put us in institutions and he, put us into armies, and that's how we survived. And how'd you get along with your brothers? Well, we fought all the time. And what about your sisters? Oh, I don't even know who they are. So this would paint a picture of an adolescent who had a past that makes it very understandable that he would be collapsing right now and psychopathic and schizophrenic and suicidal. Mm-hmm. And as we unravel that past, we can bring healing, and then we can go to the future.
And is it fair to say that this whole concept of, and I don't know if we'll probably talk more about this later on during the show, but this concept of the imbalance of the patriarchy versus the matrifocal, is that something that you feel has been has led us to where we are today, this inequality of the divine feminine, or the lack of the divine feminine?
Absolutely. And I go into that a lot in the book, because it's not just about the emancipation of women. It's about, as we look in the culture, what's missing. We're not playing with a full deck here. Mm-hmm. We're missing the contribution of half the population. And even the women that do rise to the top, they often rise in a masculine way. So it's not just about not having women at the top. It's not having women's values and perspective and contribution at the top. So I look into the history of it and how did that happen, and realize there's a natural progression where we start with the mother and then we rebel against the mother. And so when culture did that, they just buried the goddess and everything she stood for, going as much as possible in the opposite direction. So where earth was good, now earth was bad, and heaven was good. Where the body was essential, now the body was evil, and mind was good. Sex was bad, and celibacy was good. And so we had all these aspects of the old feminine. It's not so much that was, that we evolved from that, but that we denied all those important values. And it's not that patriarchy is wrong. It's provided us with enormous things. The computer that we're speaking on right now, it's provided us with the roads and the infrastructure and everything that we have, but it's missing the feminine. Sometimes I say, men have a thing and women have a place. Well, men have provided marvelous things to this world, but they've destroyed the place. And so if we want to preserve the place, we need to bring the feminine up. And then it can be in partnership with the masculine.
Absolutely. And I see very clearly what you speak of when you say that we've had women who have risen to the top, but they've done it in a masculine way. They haven't embodied their divine feminism, or they haven't embodied who they are. It's almost as if, it is as if there are women who are just trying to be men in the old, what do they call it? The old brothers circuit or something like that.
Old boys.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like we haven't had a choice. For Hillary Clinton to rise to power, she had to be masculine. And even if she sheds a tear in a speech, it's all over the internet. Oh, how weak she is. She cried, Mm-hmm. It's not like women have really had a choice. We've had to do it the masculine way because that's been the ruling paradigm. But we've done that at a cost to ourselves, at a cost to society, and a huge cost to men.
That's a great point. What would be the cost to men? What are men losing out on because we do not have feminine role models?
Okay, the men are losing out on the fact that, they have to go to work. They have the responsibility. They're in a dog-eat-dog world where it's highly competitive. They can't let down into their emotions. They can't show any weakness. They're constantly on edge. They're really quite exploited. And they have, just as women have to become masculine to succeed, men have to exploit themselves in order to succeed, and they have to exploit each other, and they don't enjoy that. And they come home to women that have, in the old model, where the man earns the money and the woman keeps the home, where she doesn't have a clue what he deals with all day. She doesn't have, the Rolodex for it. He can't even talk to her about what he does. So it's really isolating men from their feelings. It's putting too much responsibility on them. It's creating a world in which efficiency is more important than aesthetics. So we've lost beauty. Women like to bring beauty. We like to bring community, connection. They are the carriers of relationship and compassion. And so without that contribution, men are living in a world without those things, a very sterile and difficult world.
Yes, absolutely. And we can see that. All we have to do is turn on the TV and we see that. For those of us that still have one. I find that, as we are evolving into this, how shall we say, re-embracing the divine feminine, we're going to see, and we are seeing, many who are just are going to the other extreme of turning their back on the divine masculine, or the masculine element and the masculine energy that is here on the planet, to the extent that we have those that strictly want to, and I'll be honest, I am one of the people who would rather discuss the goddess than the masculine, for my own reasons, being that she's been suppressed for so long. But can you tell us a little bit about how do we create that balance, and what is it that we're missing by not having that balance? And I'm speaking now to those who just turn their back on the masculine aspect.
Well, absolutely, Bernard. This is a really important point, because where I see that we're going is to a divine partnership of equals, divine masculine and divine feminine, co-creating in partnership. And unless we hold up the divine in each of them, we can't have that partnership. And, for those who want to just denigrate what we have and what the masculine has brought us, this is one of the problems with the progressive movement and why it isn't more powerful. And that is that, we don't want an organizing principle. We don't want anybody to take command. We want everything to be equal. In spiral dynamics, we would call it the green meme. And as a result, it doesn't get anything done sometimes. And then, the right wing sort of takes over because they do have the power and command, and they are better organized. And so unless we embrace the masculine principle and really embrace the principle of power and use it in the purpose of love, it's like we don't give up our power to find love. We stand in our power to find love. And the masculine provides that kind of power, that organizational power. And it's sometimes said, when men make a living, the women make the living worthwhile. It's like it's a combination that creates heaven on earth.
It's complementary toward one another.
Yes, absolutely. What Martin Luther King said is, what is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, but love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. So we really need both.
Absolutely. And, I just have to make an observation here as we're talking about, we're just talking about the right and the left paradigm. I am one of those people that have turned my back on both of the two major parties. I feel, and now I know why, because of this conversation, is that the progressive movement in the United States is acting more like the Republican. They've embraced the masculine instead of standing in the compassion and the supportive, empathetic nature that they were built upon.
Right, and with the denigration of the feminine, everything that went with that has been seen as weakness. So if people are compassionate, if they have emotions, if they feel what's going on, they're labeled as weak and ineffective. And so we have to change that as a value, because actually to hold that compassion and to be able to feel the grief for what we're doing to the planet is an essential part of the initiation. If we aren't allowed to feel it, we're going to keep on doing it.
Oh, absolutely. What does it say? If you until you go through it, you're never going to come out of it.
Exactly. Exactly.
You must go through it and face it. I mean, many of us are still, and I see it quite often in the different chat rooms and the different websites throughout, the GIC on YouTube, on Revolution Radio. Everyone's blaming somebody else, and we have yet to really look at ourselves and how we've allowed this to happen.
Yeah, and I have a saying that blame occurs when we've given our power away. If I'm in relationship with you and everything that happened is your fault, well, where was I? That means I gave my power to you. And so when we blame something external, whatever we're blaming is where we've given our power. We need to take it back.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm assuming this is where we're going. So let's talk a little bit about that. We were covering who are we, where do we come from. Now let's discuss a little bit about your ideas on where we're going and what it's going to take for us to heal to move forward.
Well, where we're going is into what I call a new era of the heart. And rather than just a sentiment, even though that sentiment is part of it, as I say, it's an organizing principle. It's organized by a more egalitarian networking, collaboration. Wikipedia is a great example of that. Open source software is a great example of that. The Occupy movement is an example of that, saying we are the 99% and we can organize differently, even though it hasn't been that effective yet. So we are going to a place where we are organized by what we love, serving what we love, saving what we love, operating according to community, collaboration, working together. And, I have a number of things like we're going from a chain of command to a web of connection, from competition to collaboration, from the rule of markets to the rule of networks. Networks now have sometimes more power than markets. Stakeholders can have more power than stockholders as they, demonstrate to protect their homelands. We're going from an either-or paradigm to a both-and paradigm. We're going from just the rational mindset to a mythic and evolutionary mindset, asking who are we in the process of evolution? And again, where are we going? We're going from what I call an ecosystem based on our personal ego to an ecosystem where the environment is more important, from greed to green. So there's a lot of these things that, are just part of this rite of passage. And as we go to a new organizing principle, as I say, it's actually more efficient. It actually creates an enormous abundance when we just shift how we're doing it.
And that I would believe that would be with our way of thinking, our thought process.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, whenever we're lost in limitation, it's because we've had this roof over our heads and we forget to go outside and look at the night sky and say, we're living in an infinite universe. And the divine is unlimited potential and power and knowledge and all of that. And so we've sheltered ourselves from the divine. We just need to get out from our houses and look outside and see how nature does it and see that there's infinite possibilities we haven't considered.
Absolutely. And we, working toward the understanding of the self, working toward the understanding of humanity as a whole is very much a common theme of the work that we do here, especially with the Global Illumination Council. And one of the aspects that we often talk about is not only healing the way that we think of ourselves, but healing our bodies, healing our spirits. And I can't help but wonder, what are your thoughts on the idea of healing our psyche, perhaps, is a good way of thinking of it, because coming from a psychological point of view, if we're healing the psyche and keep moving forward, where are we going to be going?
Yeah, healing the psyche is really part of what we have to do as individuals. When I say we're going to a heart chakra organizing principle, the Sanskrit name for the heart chakra is Anahata. Anahata means unstruck or unhurt. And so healing ourselves is kind of unhurting our hurts. We've been betrayed, we've been lost, we've been confused. We have these hurts that we've taken on. And as we heal and unhurt them, the heart becomes more whole. It becomes able to love again. It becomes renewed with energy, with optimism, with potential. And that's, I know from being a therapist for so long, when people reclaim lost parts of themselves, when they forgive themselves, when they can hold themselves in compassion and love, they become more loving individuals. They have better relationships. They're more powerful in their life. They have a new sense of creativity and optimism. And so I know that as we do this for the culture, the same thing can happen. And personal healing is an essential part of the process. It's a part of becoming whole and a part of growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. A good example of that, actually, that's in the current events right now is, I believe it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, the Catholic Church announced, I forgot what, I think it's the Association of Catholic Priests, announced that Ireland has become pagan again. For all intents and purposes, the Association of Catholic Priests has announced that Ireland is pagan.
That is absolutely amazing.
And I was just so struck by that. And I posted the article on our Facebook page.
Oh, I'll have to check it out.
Yes, absolutely. And I was concerned what the the ramifications might be. Maybe, some people might have been offended by it or what. No one was offended. If anything, many Irish people from Ireland got on and said, we were always pagan. We just had to deal with the Catholic religion to show our paganism. And I found that, again, kind of what we were just talking about of the healing of who we are as a culture, because we know what happened to Ireland with St. Patrick, of course, or the myth of St. Patrick.
Yes, we do.
And what happened to the fact that many of their sacred sites were destroyed and churches were built upon. And for me, this was almost a reclaiming of who they are as a microcosm.
Oh, I think that's just wonderful news, because I have always felt that Ireland was not really, the land is still alive. They were not really oppressed quite as much as England. In England, the Catholic and Protestant hierarchy really took over. But in Ireland, the old ways have always stayed alive. So this is really wonderful news.
Well, I'll make sure to share it with you later. Absolutely. And
Sure.
it was posted on Huffington Post, which I was very surprised at.
I'll check that out. I read HuffPo every day.
Great. But and I feel, we're seeing it now with the I Don't Know More movement as well. Many of the indigenous are reclaiming their sacredness. We see it with the work of our dear friend Miriam Delicato, who is working with the indigenous leaders around the world to help, to create a dialogue between all of them so that there can be a greater voice. And I wonder if this is something that you see as a part of this healing process for all of us.
Absolutely. The indigenous cultures have always stayed very closely connected to nature and to, the natural processes. And, the more top-down power over religions have laid something on top of that. We've superimposed something that doesn't fit our bodies, it doesn't fit our minds, it doesn't fit our relationships.
Right back. We have to take a short break.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Welcome back to the justBernard Show, everybody. We are speaking with Anodea Judith today, and we were just speaking on a really good topic that I wanted to continue. Anodea, we were just, you were in the middle, actually, of sharing with us your thoughts on the importance of reclaiming our indigenous cultures, reclaiming our reconnection to our earth-based religions. Well, it started off with the Catholics saying that Ireland's pagan again, but it's a form of the healing as far as I'm concerned. And you were discussing that before the break. Would you like to continue talking a little bit more about that?
Well, sure. Even about Ireland, the wars they had between the Catholics and the Protestants could be in a way that something was superimposed on them that didn't fit either one. That they were inherently pagan. They were inherently connected to the land, and that neither Catholicism nor Protestant fit, and that's why they were fighting each other. It was that oppression that tends to reenact. So, yeah, I mean, I think people are not finding satisfaction, spiritual satisfaction in the corporate world, in the competitive world, in the financial world. And they're looking to other modalities because we've lost a sense of the sacred. And what the indigenous cultures have maintained or tried to maintain in spite of their oppression is a sense of the sacred, a sense of community, a sense of being connected with what's really important. And I think that that's essential to get back to the sacred.
Yes, absolutely, and not only as a culture, but on a personal level, like you said, we're so many of us are lacking that. We're not feeling that connection anymore.
Exactly. And that's a loss that I think is bigger than most people realize. As I travel around and I teach my workshops, I bring a sense of the sacred into it, and people just love it. It's like they're starved for the slightest little bit, whether it's a moment of meditation or a moment of looking into each other's eyes or a moment of just honoring the sacred elements of earth, water, fire, and air. People are starved for that.
Yeah. Yes, and I have to admit, I just came to this conclusion a couple days ago. We have almost 300 videos on our YouTube channel. And I will say that we do a short meditation at the end of every show, not the radio show, but the video show. And the meditation clips are the ones that people enjoy more. I think we get more hits just on the meditation alone than we do for the whole show, where we're talking about activism or the topic of the day. People love to have that moment of clarity and that moment of peace, it seems.
Absolutely. And people love to get something for themselves. Let's face it, that's a facet of human nature, and that's not going to go away. But what I'm saying in this new organizing principle is that we actually do get more for ourselves when we do it in community, when we do it in a sacred manner, when we protect the environment. We will all get more.
Yeah. Yes. Very true. Very true. Now, Anodea, in your book, you talk about how we don't give a power to move toward love, but combine or balance the two. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. It's like if you give up your power, and many people who, try this new paradigm find this, and you're just letting everybody walk all over you and you're being nice to everybody and you don't have, I just knocked my water over, and you don't have any boundaries and you don't have any structure, then you're not going to get very far. And that's what some people do. They give up too much of their power in honor of love, and then they get burned out and they become ineffective. So we actually have to come to our own power. Now, in this power paradigm that we've been in for the past 5,000 years, that's based, I actually call it the submissive paradigm instead of the dominant paradigm. It's the submissive paradigm where more people are submitting than dominating. That's how it's built, is that everybody gives up their power. So we have to learn to reclaim our own power. Say, what's my authenticity? What's my life purpose? What do I want to create? Who am I? And that what's, been billed as the me generation has been part of the process of developing our own power, but not to stay there, to use that power in service of something higher.
Yes, here. I couldn't agree more. And for those, one of the questions I get a lot, I get emailed a lot, is the fact that many people are starting to, let's say they have an inkling of their power. They have an inkling of understanding who they are, but they are very afraid to exercise it. I'm sure we see examples on Facebook. I see it all the time. Thank you for posting what I'm afraid to post on my own Facebook, And what can we tell individuals on a one-to-one level if you're concerned and you're afraid of what other people are seeing of you? Let's say of you spreading your wings. What can we do to encourage them to feel more comfortable?
Okay, well, listen, Bernard, to this story, because this is something I have in my Eastern Body, Western Mind book. Imagine that, some guy's sitting on a park bench in Central Park, New York on a Saturday afternoon. Let's call him Carl. And he's just sitting there taking some time off, basking in the sun. And this uniformed policeman, comes and stands in front of him and blocks the sun. And so Carl, being kind of a nice guy, he just moves over on the park bench, goes back to basking in the sun, and the uniformed policeman moves over again. And Carl says, excuse me. And the policeman says no and puts his hands on his shoulders and holds him down. And Carl starts yelling, and the policeman, puts his foot down on Carl's foot, and Carl starts screaming and yelling, and the policeman chains him to the park bench. Okay, so then Carl looks around and he sees that everybody in the park is chained to a park bench, and they're all scowling at him for making such a fuss. This is the situation we're in this world. So many people have given up their power, and they've given it up from such a young age, and they have cooperated with that when somebody makes a fuss, they go, well, who are you? I'm putting up with this. Why should you make such a fuss? And we have to be willing to say, this is unjust. I'm taking a stand for it. And that's part of being in our own individual power. Even if my coworkers criticize me, even if my partner or my family doesn't get behind me, we have to be willing to say, this is unjust and I'm taking a stand for it. Edward Snowden is a good example of that.
Yeah.
Really daring to step out, with incredible risk to his own life and well-being, to make a stand for something that is unjust and needs to be known by the public.
Very, very true. And to take it a little bit further, to take this concept or this idea a little bit further, and I know I spoke a little bit earlier about when we are in true spiritual alignment, that social responsibility is inevitable. But you will see, and I don't know if you ever get it on a personal level, if you get the emails of that sort of, how dare you raise a ruckus? You're supposed to be spiritual. Activism isn't spiritual, or speaking out against the elites isn't spiritual. We need to focus on thinking happy thoughts, because when you acknowledge the negative, you're building the negative.
Oh yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? What can we say to those of us who really feel it's important to bring these issues up?
Right. I mean, I get this all the time from my blogs. I write regular blogs, and I write about, current political issues and things that are up in the world. And I remember writing quite a bit around the time of the election. And, my website, sacredcenters.com, is about the chakras, and it's about spirituality. And many people do write, and they say, you're supposed to be writing about spiritual things. How dare you bring in politics? But, it's like what we've done in this old paradigm, if we've made separations between everything. And we have especially separated spirituality from the rest of our daily life, to the point where we have lost the sacred in the daily life. And so, taking on important issues, Edward Snowden's stand is a very spiritual stand, really. It's a stand for transparency. It's a stand for honesty. It's a stand for people's privacy. So I think that separation is a false one. And sometimes the most spiritual thing we can do is stand up and speak out and raise a ruckus. And, it's a crime not to be talking about the negative. Because, when we're not talking about global warming in the public discourse, it's like being in a burning theater and not telling people that it's on fire. It's a crime to allow this to continue and not talk about it. But you're right. People go and say, well, why do you harp on that stuff? We can't do anything about global warming. I just want to enjoy my life. And I kind of shake my head and say, well, that's somebody that hasn't quite grown up yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that, for me, and I'll go a little bit into the paranormal aspect of it here, is that I did have an out-of-body experience with, whether you want to call them angels or guides or whatnot. And the first thing they showed me is what was wrong on the planet. Then they taught me love, compassion, and how to elevate it. But the first thing I was shown was this: look at what's going on your planet. This is going on. This is going on. We need to teach people to come back to love and compassion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a line in my PowerPoint that, the world is being destroyed, from a lack of heart, a lack of caring. We don't care what we do to indigenous cultures. We don't care what we do to the rainforest. We don't care what we do to, people in Pakistan that are being killed by drones that are just innocent civilians. You know, the ability to care is a development. It's something that happens with maturity.
Here, here, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And to take that a little bit, further, I feel that from the spiritual standpoint, one of my teachers, when I was very young, I was about 19 or 20, and one of my teachers said to me, your goal is to remove the veil between your physical, your mental, and your spiritual, and have one foot on every plane of consciousness. And I know, coming from, the corporate world, if that's what you want to call it, the two things we were never allowed to talk about was politics and religion.
Yes, right.
And so it's like, and they're so diametrically opposed to one another that it seems that to have a conversation like we're having today of both principles is, oh my God, it's almost taboo in the old paradigm, like we're talking about, in the old world organizing principle. But in this new one, it is about removing the veils. It is about living in the moment per se, but living through spirit in the moment and being able to, how shall we say, express ourselves on all planes of consciousness.
Absolutely. And we need leaders that are spiritually mature, and what we do have is a separation of church and state, which is a good thing in the sense that not a particular religion supposedly is allowed to take over the government. Now, of course, when we see the Tea Party and the right-wing Christians and all that trying to take over government, we see there is no separation of church and state there. But what that really means, like I say, is that we don't have power over from a particular religion, but we've thrown out the baby with the bathwater. Yeah. And if we had an embrace of many different spiritual traditions where none of them were having power over the political process, but we realized that to be activists, we also have to nurture ourselves spiritually. We have to do our meditation to mature. Then we have a different paradigm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that just now it seems... Well, let me just share a personal experience with everybody here. As many of our listeners know, I'm very involved in the Occupy movement, and I was a facilitator for Occupy Roanoke here for a little over a year. And one of the first memories I have is the first day of Occupy Roanoke. That's the day that everybody just showed up. Nobody knew each other. And, that was when, we had 300, 400 people showing up at the very beginning. And my first sign was a picture of a head with an eye, the third eye, and it said Occupy Within first.
Oh, yeah, nice. Yes.
That was my first sign, Occupy
Beautiful.
Within first.
Yeah.
Do you know that, they collected all the signs at the end of the day to bring them back the next day? The next day, my sign was gone. Somebody had thrown it out.
No.
Because it didn't deal with the anger. It didn't deal with the, we've had it with Wall Street. We've had it with this. We've had it with that. And it's a shame, too, because we had many, many young people who were coming to us that wanted to do meditation circles, that wanted to do drum circles, that wanted to do all the other. But the older folks, and when I say older, I mean over 50, 60, folks wanted to only focus on the issues versus what the small, I guess you could call it the newborn community, because when you're dealing with 300 or 400 people, it's a new community all trying to get to know one another. And sadly, what has happened is Occupy Roanoke is almost dissolved. Almost. There's a few people hanging on, but all of them are over 60. And there are no young people left, and all they're focusing on is gun control, the topic du jour. And I can't help but wonder and I know this is only here in our locality, because I know it's very different. All the different Occupy movements around the world are very different, and I'm very happy to say that what I see happening around the world, they are bringing in a sense of spirituality, a sense of community, a sense of oneness. And the young people are allowed to speak. The young people are allowed to lead. And again, this has nothing to do with age. This might just be a cultural thing here in the South. But I can't help but wonder if we can learn the lessons from something like this. Like you said, the Occupy movement hasn't really quite, made the change that we want. but I feel it really has created a really good paradigm in the sense of creating an equal community.
Well, it's raised awareness, and that's always the first step. How many people
Yes.
are not aware that it was only 1%, and really it's actually 0.01%
Yeah.
of the population that owns and controls so much of the wealth. So, even though it hasn't changed the paradigm yet, it's created an awareness that's all over, and now we have a word for it. So it hasn't been ineffective. But, what you're saying reflects that the old paradigm of either or, one part against another, that is the old third chakra paradigm. And unfortunately, many movements are trying to do something new, but they're doing it with the principles of the old paradigm. And it's not going to work. And I even go to conferences about, all of this stuff. But the conferences are still held in the old paradigm, which is one speaker is on the stage and everybody else is passively listening. And you go from speaker to speaker and nobody moves their body and they just sit and it's all intellectual and it's all talk and nothing happens. And I go, well, the ideas are great, but the way it's being run is still old paradigm. So the same way, if the Occupy movement or any activist movement is still doing it with the us and the us against them paradigm, it's bound toward failure, even if their heart and their ideas are in the right place.
Absolutely. You can't, I feel like I should have had you on the show 5 years ago. We think exactly alike. We cannot create something new using old tools.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to think of that quote by Albert Einstein. We can't change the world with the same thinking that created it.
Right. And for those of us, and I know many of us here on Revolution Radio are, some of us are angry activists. And I know that the same thing with G.I.C. and Facebook and everywhere else that I'm a part of here on the G.I.C. network, that we do all these different shows. We get a lot of people that are against, angry. And I talk about it all the time. We look at the difference between let's say against the New World Order. Let's talk about, well, just as an example, Alex Jones versus Luke Rukowski. Alex Jones is calling the Bilderberg group scumbag, lowlife, screaming and yelling, and Luke Rukowski is laughing, saying, look what these people are doing. Not talking about Alex Jones, but talking about, the Bilderbergers. Who do they think they are? He takes a different tone in the sense of, okay, this is what we don't want to do. Look at those people in there. This is something we don't want to do. And then you have all the angry people yelling. I'm like, well, isn't this the same energy that we're fighting against?
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I talk about the history in my book is to show how we got to these paradigms that we can be against, and how they began as solutions to former problems that have now become problems. Mm-hmm. Industrialization and factory workers and capitalism all started as a way to, lift people up out of poverty and improve the standard of living. And yet there was a shadow side to it. And so unless we kind of understand these things from the long evolutionary view, we don't understand why they're there. And as we create solutions now, we have to realize that even solutions can create more problems if we don't look at both the light and the shadow of it.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Now, speaking about your book, first of all, let me just say again, I've read through your book. I haven't read the whole book, but I've read through it. Like I said, I love every topic, every discussion that you have. Has the book come out yet?
It is. I've only had galleys come out, and it's shipped on summer solstice, and so the books are all being shipped to the warehouse right now. The date that we're having everybody buy it on Amazon is July 16th.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so it will be available on July 16th, and it looks here like it's going to be $19.95 in America?
Yeah.
Great.
And I think it's cheaper on Amazon, and Kindle is about $8. So.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I got to tell you, I'm loving it. So everybody, if you haven't clicked on it yet, go ahead and check it out.
You can go to the website globalheartawakens.com, and you can find out a little bit more about the book and see the table of contents, or you can see that up on Amazon now. It's already listed. And the idea of buying it all on one day means that it makes a statement to the world at large. It's not just my ego wanting to push it to the top of the charts, although I've got some of that in there. But more than that, it's that, publishers and media and everybody can see that there's a rally to these ideas, that people are wanting to embrace a paradigm of the heart, that community does have power, and that we can make a statement as a community about what's important. And we vote with our dollars, we vote with what we buy on Amazon and what books are important, and that influences what books get published in the future.
Yeah.
So it's more than just me as an individual author. It's really voting for a paradigm.
I couldn't agree more. The to go back to our earlier discussion before we start talking about the book, is in your book. In your book, you do have a section called "From Occupy to the New Economy." And
yes.
What is the? I haven't had a chance to read through it. I'm sitting here thrumming through right now, and I just saw it. From Occupy to the New Economy. What is the gist of that? What is the intention of putting that near the end, actually, for that matter?
Well, near the end is where we're going. And so I'm looking both at the personal heart and what we can do in our personal lives, and then I'm looking at the global heart and the major institutions and how they're changing. And economics is one of them. Government is another. And actually from the Occupy movement is one of the reasons that I did a whole rewrite on this book, because when I wrote it the first time, Occupy hadn't happened yet. And so I went, oh, well, that has to be brought in, because that is a people's movement of, the people versus the old power elites that have the money. So what I'm really looking at is that, it's not new that there's been a gap between rich and poor. If we go back to the first civilizations in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, the kings had these palatial, multi-acre estates and, that were built by slaves that had nothing at all. And, so that's a very old model of the power over dynamic. And it's only now that there has been, like I say, enough maturity on the part of the common people that we can actually create a different way. And what I'm talking about in that section is different models of economics that are coming. And one person I quote, whose work I just love and like to support anytime I can, is Charles Eisenstein, author of Sacred Economics. And he really looks at the economic system and how the debt system is bound to create a scarcity. Because every time you borrow $100 and have to pay back $110, you've got to take that extra $10 from somewhere. And so we end up having to take that from the environment. And so when you have things like Wikipedia that people are creating and accessing for free, open source software and barter systems and, Bitcoins and all sorts of things that are happening that are experiments in alternative economies, local currencies. There's a lot of things people are doing that's going to change the dynamics of the old economic system.
And we're seeing it now. We're seeing it slowly start to take place. And it's a very thrilling time. It's a very scary time to be on the planet. But I also find it very thrilling to see the birth of these new paradigms. It's almost, we talk so much about the new paradigm. And for me, it's not one new paradigm. It's lots of little new paradigms, like new little economy paradigm, new little food paradigm, new little housing paradigm. And eventually it will just create a whole new world of existence, I would think.
All those new paradigms actually add up and point to a new era.
Yes.
And that's what I'm talking about in the book. And, articulating the dynamics of this new era that embraces green technology, that embraces alternative economies, that embraces true democracy, that embraces the peace movement, the activist movement, the, social justice movement, that there's an overarching paradigm that we're moving to. And as we can understand what that is, we can more easily become a part of it.
Here, absolutely. In reference, going back to the book, and you begin the book with a statement: evolution is the God's way of making sure, making more gods. And we said that earlier, and I love that powerful statement at the very beginning. We talked a little bit about us becoming gods here, and can you expand? We have just about 3 more minutes on this segment, but can you expand on that statement a little bit more? Are we becoming gods at this time?
I think that we are. And for better or worse, we have the power of gods, as I say, to destroy the to destroy the climate, to destroy the planet with nuclear weapons, to destroy each other, to destroy whole countries, to change the gene pool. This is power on the scale of gods. And if you look at, our evolution through history, we started out not having much power at all. When we lived in nature, we were in the power of nature, but we couldn't make it light when it was dark. We couldn't make it warm when it was cold. We couldn't, grow things in glass, greenhouses when there was an ice age. We didn't have any power over nature. When we put seeds in the ground, we began to get a little power over nature. When we developed technology, we began to get a little power. And so we have been developing the power of gods, but we have not had as much development in the wisdom. And I see our spiritual traditions being handed down to us as practices to help us mature. And as gods, we are co-creating in a grand symphony of creation. Well, just like musicians in a symphony, they have to practice on their own to play well together. And so the spiritual practices are helping us evolve into divine consciousness that will match then our power.
Yes, absolutely. When you say divine consciousness, what do you mean?
I mean an awareness of the divine, an awareness of each of ourselves as a spark of the divine, that I carry that within me, that you carry it within you, and that we have power over our lives. We have power to make change. We have power to stand up and articulate a new way. We have power to create, power to love. And that is a divine power.
And we only got about 40 seconds, but ever so quickly, we always talk, in the old paradigm, there's talk about leaders versus followers. Is it fair to say we all have the ability to be leaders?
Yes. And I say we're moving from a chain of command to a web of connection. Mm-hmm. So let's pick that one up when we come back.
Yes, absolutely. As you all know, we are speaking to Anodea Judith. Her book is called The Global Heart Awakens, and you can get it on Amazon. We're going to give you the website. Trevor, I'm sure, has posted it already on the chat. Trevor, if you can post that again, that would be great. And we're going to be taking a short station identification break. When we return, we're going to pick up where we left off, and plus we have a lot more questions.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
And welcome back to the Just Bernard Show. We are here with Anodea Judith, and we are having a fantastic conversation. Before the break, I had asked Anodea if we are now moving out of the paradigm of leaders versus followers into something where we are all leaders. And Anodea, you were saying something that we're going to be working more in cooperation.
Yeah, and moving from a chain of command to a web of connection. So in a chain of command, it's like trying to get all the fibers to be one thing and weave into a sturdy rope. And if you only have a few fibers, that's good. But when you have something so complex as our civilization, and you try to get them to all conform along this chain of command, the rope becomes unwieldy. You can't do anything with it. If instead you look at a web of connection, each point on the web has influence. Each point can influence any other point. And you can't say, it's not that none are more important than the others. Some are major hubs and some are minor hubs. But the web is more flexible. It can cover the whole planet. It allows for individuality. And I think one of the losses of the old paradigm is that we were all supposed to be the same. And we lost the beauty of diversity. We lost the beauty of diversity in race and gender and sexual persuasion and age and everything else that is part of the fabric of a web of connection that makes an incredible array of possibility. And we lost people's contribution.
Yeah.
So, we can be leaders, and we can be leaders by really embracing our own unique gifts.
Here, here. And not only is that a great observation in the sense that we are all good at something. And I find that, especially when you're dealing in a group dynamic or community dynamic, that everyone has something to offer. Now, that's not to say that, we were talking a little bit earlier about, conferences and using the old paradigm and whatnot, and I couldn't help but think about some of the issues that some of the Occupy movements have because it works on consensus. And I remember trying so hard to say we have no leaders, but that's not to say that we cannot acknowledge that Anodea's a better writer. I'm a better cook. Trevor's a better cook, but or that one's better at gardening, or that one's better, and that we cannot learn from them in their particular skill set.
Right, exactly.
And I feel that a lot of people get very confused, or it's like, well, if we're all leaders, then I shouldn't have to listen to anybody. But we also have to look at it with a bit of humility that, yes, we are all leaders, but we all have different skills or knowledge that we are able to share with one another. And that's what makes that common connection.
I'll tell you a story. A long time ago, I lived on sort of the Back to the Land movement, and we had a community that lived, on a piece of land, and we were an organization, and we held events and all sorts of things like that. And one day we had a long meeting and analyzing what was working and what wasn't working. And we were, counterculture to the core. And what we had to admit when we examined what was working is that what worked best was when one person took charge and headed up something. Whether it was the creation of an event or the magazine that we published or the garden that we had or, anything that we were doing. And it's like we had this paradigm of, everybody's equal. But we realized that when somebody took charge and took command, things got done better. But it wasn't the same person for every project. A different person took command of the publishing of the magazine, and a different person took command of the marketing for events. And so if we look at the human body, each cell has a purpose. Your bone cells have a purpose. Your blood cells have a purpose. Your nerve cells. And if the brain were to say, well, I'm superior and I like nerve cells better and everybody's supposed to be a nerve cell, you wouldn't function.
Yeah.
You function because each cell is being exactly what it is, doing the job it was made for.
Absolutely.
But it's functioning as a whole.
Almost as if it's looking at it in the sense of, and again, we talk about changing the way that we think and the way that we perceive the world around us. It's to celebrate everyone's abilities and everyone's successes, I guess, would be a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, and to give them an empowered opportunity to contribute.
Mm-hmm.
The old paradigm actually disempowers people. They're just pushing the clock. They're just doing a job to get a paycheck and to numb out and come home and watch TV. And, most people I find say, I'd really like to make a contribution, but I'm stuck in this job and I got to support my family and my kids are going to be going to school. And so I can't do what I would really love to do, which is make a contribution.
Yeah.
And so the more we empower people, the more they show up to the more they can care.
Yes, absolutely. And it does, well, not to quote Hillary, but it takes a village,
It does take a village. Take responsibility means we have to have the ability to respond. When we're powerless, we don't have the ability to respond.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you talked a little bit earlier about how the old paradigms don't work. We've tried capitalism, we've tried socialism, communism, tribalism, all the isms out there. And
I wouldn't say that they don't work. I would just say that they work very well in a certain sense, but they have a shadow side.
Yes.
Yeah. So go on.
Yes, they do have a shadow side. And I find that now I'm seeing a lot, especially with young people, they're talking about anarchy. But not anarchy in the sense of, burning buildings or things like that, but anarchy in the sense of creating community projects without government influence. And not necessarily influence, but, like we said earlier, someone's not telling them to do that. It's like someone is not telling that group of people to start that co-op. They're doing it because they saw a need and they're filling it. We used to have a saying at Occupy: you see a need, you fill it.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful way of looking at it, whether you want to call it cooperatism or co-oping or anarchy. I mean, I know a lot of people are using the term anarchy, or what's the other word? Social libertarianism is another one that's being used. I find that might be well, for me, I find we're seeing a lot more of that, and I can't help but wonder if this is something that you're seeing as a part of this awakening process.
Well, I see it as part of the process. You know, the root of archy, as in hierarchy or anarchy, actually means sacred, or it means rule. So hierarchy was the rule of the sacred, and actually started with the old priest kings that were the part of the temple,
Right.
And that was the center of organization in the old cultures. So when we say anarchy, we can say against the rule, and I think that that's a start to break up this hierarchical dominance, but that can go into chaos if we don't replace it with a different kind of rule. And that different kind of rule can be organized through, various processes. And I think what we're looking at now in our groups is what is the process through which we can have a small group get along? What is the process for a meeting? What is the process for a family to come to their agreements? What is the process for a company? If we aren't doing it from a hierarchy where the CEO says what the game plan is, what is the process for a company when employees can actually contribute to the direction? It's not just the idea, but we need ways that can happen.
Exactly. Let's talking a little bit more about the book, The Global Heart Awakens. You talk about, and we spoke of briefly, the union of divine masculine and divine feminine to create the sacred marriage. I know that there's a lot of, I guess, for lack of a better term, pagan spiritual folk that believe in the same thing. It's a unification of the polar opposites to create something divine here on this planet. A lot of people might be turned off by it because there is a fear against the secret brotherhoods, like the Freemasons agree with the same thing. So you hear the positive aspect of it and you hear the negative aspect of it. But the reality of it is, for me, is it's a union of polar opposites to create something new and divine. What do you mean by that this is a part of the new myth, and why is this so important to us?
Yeah, well, the old myth was, Father knows best, and we all give up our power to Father because he was single parenting humanity through its cultural evolution, without a mother. But now when we have actually a partnership, that's a new myth of how we do things. And the divine feminine and divine masculine, indeed, it does, hark back to a pagan sensibility, where the divine came in many forms, and it came in the form of gods and goddesses, and both men and women had something to relate to remind themselves that they have that spark of divine within. But what I see is, creating a new myth is that we're now entering the myth of partnership. The sacred marriage is more than just masculine and feminine. It's the marriage of heaven and earth, of mind and body, of light and shadow, of inner and outer, of, passive and active, leading and following. It's really the integration of opposites in general. And when we have that, we come back to our wholeness. And from that wholeness, we can create what's called the divine child, which is just a symbol. I wouldn't say just a symbol. It's a powerful symbol. And to me, what are we creating out of our partnership? We are creating the future. We are becoming parents of the future right now. We're writing it. We're creating it, all of us, in our technologies, in our science, in our medicine, in our communications, in our radio shows. We are creating the future. We are parents of it. And that future is divine. The divine child has magical powers that exceed the powers of the parents.
Which, if all intents and purposes, is the path that we really want to be on. We want the next generation to be more empowered than what we are today.
Absolutely. You want the student to surpass the teacher.
And give up our control.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, this does happen, is that, each generation is, in a sense, more powerful, more aware, more capable than the generation before them at that same age. I mean, look at the generation now and the generation I was as a boomer. I mean, it's just a world of difference.
Yes.
And so that's a good thing. That's the process of evolution.
Yes, that's the positive aspect of giving our power to the next generation. We look at our culture, and one of the challenges that we do have is the fact that we don't think about the next generation. We're not creating for the next generation at this present time. Well, maybe some of us are, but
the seventh generation.
Yeah, the paradigm is not necessarily creating for the next several generations, whereas we see with the cultures of yore, for lack of a better term, the ancient cultures, they would create for hundreds of generations in advance. We look at the community that built Stonehenge; it took them 10 generations to build that.
1,300 years.
1,300 years.
That's the fact. That's a lot of generations.
It certainly is.
And great cathedrals sometimes took more than a generation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for those of us who are involved in this path of the awakening process, and like I call the midwives, whether you want to call yourself a light worker or pagan or starseed, we are the midwives. And we may not see the birth of this new humanity, well, at least not in this lifetime, but we need to continue creating. We need to continue creating and empowering the future generations. And actually, that's a part of our pledge for the members of the G.I.C. With that being said, Anodea, what are some of the concerns that you have today as far as our day-to-day challenges at this time?
Well, just to climb on that, Bernard, this sense of seeing past our current generation or lifetime, global warming is one of those issues because it's a slow process, and we say, well, where is it going to be in 2050? Where is it going to be in 2100? I myself probably won't be alive in 2100, but we have to develop the ability to think of that anyway in the way that they built the old cathedrals or built Stonehenge. And the trouble is people are so, they're so embedded in the now and only thinking to the first quarter of the corporate, profits that we are going to destroy our future. And this is 4 billion years of evolution of life on this planet that we are privileged to inherit. We have no right to destroy that. We need to start thinking in the long term. And that's part of being a grown-up.
It most certainly is. It most certainly is. Now, as far as well, you know what? Let me ask you. This is we're getting near the end of today's show. I can't believe how quickly it came by, and we'll talk some more. But I like to always make sure we have the time for our guests to say, if you had one message that you wanted to give humanity as a whole, what would that one message be?
To open to the possibilities of the heart in your day-to-day life. To look at every relationship as an opportunity to learn how to love. I don't think we're born knowing how to love. I think we're born wanting to be loved. But I don't think we're born knowing how to get it or how to do it. And that's what we're learning on the planet right now. And that becomes a higher awareness. It becomes a presence and authenticity. It becomes a faith in the future. And if we have that faith, we can get through the initiation. But we need to fortify ourselves, fortify our minds and bodies, become informed, network with each other, and that we're doing this together. That is the difference.
Yes, absolutely. And so what's love got to do with it?
Yeah, well, we say the heart has its reasons, but the reasons we don't know. So, we're getting out of the logic paradigm to something that is more deeper into the mystery of the heart. And we know that love is an unfathomable mystery, and that it can't be controlled. I can't make you love me. I can't make someone else fall in love with me or fall out of love with me. There's a mystery to that. And that there's a mystery unfolding in evolution. There's a mystery unfolding in metaphysics. That metaphysics is the gateway to the mystery. There's a mystery in all that we haven't discovered yet. And that mystery, if we follow our hearts, can lead us forward. Studies have shown that the heart actually knows the future. The Institute of Heart Math did a study where they showed people slides of different images, and some of them were very pleasant, people holding hands, kissing, beautiful sunsets. Some of them were very unpleasant, people dying, wars. And they measured the heart and the brain response to these images. And as they predicted, there was a certain kind of response to the positive ones and a certain kind of response to the negative ones. What they discovered was that both the heart and brain fired a few seconds before the image was shown, and that the heart fired before the brain. So it's almost like the heart knew what was coming. So when we talk about where are we going in the future, we're being led to the future, and our hearts are leading us if we really dare to listen to them. And so I really urge people to follow their hearts, but in order to do so, you have to stand in your power. You have to be connected to the divine. You have to have your feet on the ground. You've got to be in touch with your emotions. You've got to, have a vision. You've got to be able to communicate. You have to be really all chakra paradigm. And then we're living in the full spectrum of human existence. And when we co-create from that place, miracles are possible.
Yes. And with that being said, for those of us who are going to be living in love, or are living in love, or are in contact with that divine love spark that is within us, what can we do to help? And I know this is a very touchy question. We hear it all the time on a lot of the radio shows. What can we do to help people wake up? What can we do to help people see the truth? What can we do to help people see the divine love within them? But I guess my question to you, now that we have just a few minutes left, is for those who are so concerned that it's the end. I'm seeing it on the chat right now. Somebody had said martial law is coming in 2 weeks. Grab your guns, get some food. And we hear that it happens every 3 months. To Alex Jones or someone on MSNBC will be like, "Oh, it's the end. It's the collapse." For me, that's living in fear and still allowing someone to giving your power over to what I call a fear pornographer. Exactly. And what can we do to encourage those that are so concerned that next week is martial law and it's the end of the world?
Yeah, well, people, like you say, have always been saying that. But I think that it is true that something is dying. It is true that there is a collapse going on. It is true that there is pain coming and difficulty and challenge. And it's just to frame that as a temporary challenge of initiation that is just there in order to push us to this new organizing principle. And once we get there, the challenge can subside. And, the more martial law tries to assert itself, the more the people are going to rebel against it, and it's going to find that it's ineffective, that it can't do it. Mm-hmm. And so that's all part of the process, that the old paradigm is going to hang on a little tighter.
Yes. And, and the good news is, and we've all seen it, is when we do come into crisis, at least in my experience, I've seen it growing up in South Florida with all the hurricanes. We saw it with Hurricane Sandy. Mm-hmm. When we have crisis, is usually a time when the best of humanity comes out. You start seeing that cooperation, that support, that concern for one another's well-being. So for those that are concerned that, someone is going to try to implement martial law or the economy's collapsing and we're going to lose everything, I have a feeling that that'll be a very positive learning curve for us to see to see where the compassion of humanity is headed.
Yeah. George Bush actually did wonders for MoveOn.org because everybody was so pissed off at him and wanting to do something else that they actually joined up with MoveOn and joined up with non-governmental organizations. And, the Wall Street fiasco created Occupy.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have arisen except for the old order trying to establish itself. So, when this happens, it actually spurs the new movement.
Exactly, and again, it goes back to the image that we gave earlier about giving birth to a new paradigm it's not going to be easy. It's painful.
No, it's not. And, if you saw a pregnant woman who lived in isolation of all humanity, and she was, I don't know how she got pregnant then, but she never had seen anybody pregnant, and she started going into labor and experiencing the pain, she would say, "I'm dying." And if somebody came along and said, no, you're just pregnant and you're giving birth. In fact, what that is you're going to push an 8-pound little baby out between your legs. She's going to say, I'm dying.
Yeah.
And, unless you've seen it happen, birth is something miraculous, where something larger than you think is possible comes through an opening that you think is impossible. And so I think birthing on this planet, going through the contractions to birth a new age, is that we are going to experience the miraculous as we come together in this new form. And that miracles are possible when we work together, when we change. And we're going to wake up at some point and look back and say, what a nightmare we were believing. When you wake up in the morning from a bad dream, you go, oh, that was only a dream, thank goodness. When we say, what a nightmare where we're spending the bulk of our economy on the war machine to go over and destroy other people. How could we have bought into that? Mm-hmm. It's like looking back at how could we have bought into, bleeding or burning people at the stake.
Right, or slavery
or slavery or any of that, You talked about the gay marriage being up right now with the Supreme Court, but, there was a time not too long ago, even in my lifetime, where it was illegal for people to have interracial marriage.
Yep.
And now that seems crazy, and it's like, of course. And so there will be a time when gay marriage is kind of accepted as, well, of course. And we look back at a barbaric time when that wasn't allowed.
Exactly. It's all, again, back to the idea of it's a birthing process. And we have to be courageous. I really feel we have to be courageous and really just keep our eye on the prize, for lack of a better term. We'll get through it. We will get through this.
And the word courage actually comes from the word for the heart. Cor is the root. Like in Spanish, it's corazón. In French, it's the cor, or cuore in Italian. The word courage actually comes from the heart. And the herbs that, are supposed to produce courage are herbs that tonify the heart. So it's in the heart that we find our courage.
Absolutely. Hear. And that's a perfect way to wrap up today's discussion. This is what we need to do. We need to be courageous and talk to our heart and listen to our heart, quite honestly. And again, the book is called The Global Heart Awakens. It's Anodea Judith, The Humanity's Rite of Passage from Love of Power to the Power of Love. And the book will be...
You have a course coming up, and you say, what can people do, called the Love-Powered Evolutionary. And that is what we are creating, people who can take leadership in this new paradigm. And that will be coming up through the Shift Network starting July 2nd. There's a free call you can get on, Becoming a Love-Powered Evolutionary. So I really urge people to find out about that. And if they want to sign up for the 7-week course afterwards, they can, and it will empower them to find out how they can take power in this change.
Sounds great. Well, we thank you so much, Anodea Judith, for joining us today. Next week, we have, I already forgot who we have. I believe we're going to be discussing the Nephilim next week with another gentleman who wrote the book, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. It should be a very interesting discussion. Anodea, what is your website where people can find you?
SacredCenters.com is my main website, and GlobalHeartAwakens.com is for the book, and I have another one, CreatingOnPurpose.net.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Trevor, I don't know if you've posted them. I know he has posted several on the chat room, but please do follow up on, by all means. Anodea, you're probably one of the guests that have really looked at the world the same way I do, almost exactly. So I am so grateful to have met your acquaintance, and thank you for connecting with us today.
Well, thank you. It's been a delightful conversation, Bernard. It's really to talk to somebody intelligent.
Bye, everyone. We'll see you next week.
There is no denying the world is awakening. We see it in the global uprisings and demonstrations of the people around the planet and the new way of thinking and living that is arising naturally within each one of us and our communities. I have been a major player in this global shift and movement for over 20 years and have helped tens of thousands of people around the world change their lives and find their voice in order to help create the paradigm change we so desperately need. Join me here at Revolution Radio on the Just Bernard Show every Tuesday at noon Eastern Eastern Time for 2 hours of powerful interviews and discussion with some of the most influential visionaries of consciousness, alternative media, and suppressed knowledge. We promise to reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience.